Today, we are going to talk about actually two subjects fused into one, that is, erasure of science, Indian science, from our curricula, from our memories, and the role of the two invaders that we have had. And that invasion, actually, the mental invasion, continues till date. And we have, as usual, Wednesday evening, Vibhuti Ji. Plus, we have Dr. Raj Vedam to tell us something in depth about all these issues. So let's go straight to them. And before that, I just request you to please subscribe and also to go to our description to support us and to follow us. So namaste, all viewers. Namaste, Raj Vedam ji, as well
Namaste.
as Vibhuti ji.
Namaste. Namaste.
And wonderful having both of you here once again. And today, of course, the focus will be on Raj Vedamji because he is going to give us an overview of a very important subject. So I go straight to Raji. Raji, how important is the erasure of science, our own science, and our own mathematics, and the traditions of science and mathematics, and the philosophy of science and mathematics?
So that
To
go on.
I just frame my question. How important is that for the Westerners to keep our self esteem low?
That's a excellent question, Sanjay ji. Thank you. It's a pleasure again to appear on your show over here on the Jaipur Dialogues. So, to me, it is falsity on an enormous scale. On an enormous scale, to not acknowledge the contributions of ancient Indians. I'm always absolutely shocked when I read history of mathematics as written by Western experts or on the history of astronomy and these kind of things, where the acknowledgement of India is literally zero. I mean, figuratively, they say India got the symbol zero. And that is about it. So that is a smoke and mirrors for people to go around chanting that, yeah, we got the zero and the numerals. And by the way, anything else is appropriated away. So Indians appear content just saying, yeah, we got the zero, we got the numbers, but in between, people have no idea about the enormous heritage we have in mathematics, in astronomy, and everything else, which has been appropriated away from the Indian civilization. So it is incredibly important, if you ask me, to put the record straight, to show with evidence what are the accomplishments of ancient Indian scientists in mathematics and astronomy, medicine, different kinds of learnings, and how it impacted the world. And over the years, I've collected a lot of data and evidence on these things. And it leads to the question, so why exactly are the Westerners also obfuscating all of these things? Why are they so intent in trying to hide these accomplishments? So, in fact, in this famous series called Cosmos, about 20 to 30 years ago, this famous NASA scientist, Carl Sagan, positions that question. He says, so, why is it that Indians and Chinese did not tumble into science and technology the way the Western civilization has? Why did they not do that? It reveals so much of ignorance on his part of history. It reveals so much of obfuscation that has happened thanks to so many different forces acting on India. So, let me just give a very quick background to the Sanjayji. So, the story goes, since William Jones found this commonality, Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, and all these kind of things, they wanted to know why exactly are European languages related to Sanskrit? What is the relationship of Westerners to the Indian people? So that started off linguistic analysis. That started off a whole lot of different narratives. And among those narratives was one where Indians are supposed to have come from Central Asia. At least what they call as Aryans, are supposed to have come from Central Asia, 1500 BCE, and brought with them this Sanskrit language, caste system, cow worship, and all these illiterate nomads, by the way. These guys had no idea of anything. They
illiterates,
destroyed.
illiterates produced a language of such sophistication
Yes,
that
yes, yes. And
seventh quarter of the
they destroyed a superior civilization, the Harappa civilization. They overran these guys or chased them to the south, wherever. And then these illiterate people are running around northern India for 1,000 years. They did not have any civilization, no writing, no nothing, only caste system, only cow worship, this kind of thing. Until Magadha's contact with the Greeks in 300 BCE. Then the Greeks civilized the Indians. Then suddenly Ashoka got Brahmi writing and other such things, and suddenly we became civilized, and suddenly we became normal. So the question comes, because you are a young civilization, it's only the Greeks who civilized you after Harappa. Therefore, you cannot have any learning, no mathematics, no astronomy, no medicine. You don't have enough gestation time for that knowledge to have taken root. Therefore, you must have copied from the Greeks, you must have copied from the Babylonians, you must have copied from the Chinese, Egyptians. Everybody taught us. You were great students, we learned. That is about it. So, this is the positioning of Indian sciences and technologies to the present date. It tells us that we learned astronomy from the Babylonians, astronomy and mathematics from the Greeks. It says that the Turkic Muslims taught us cuisine, music, architecture, and other such things. It tells us that our Brahmi script came from the Levant region, Israel region, through the Semitic scripts. It tells us that the British got us rationality, logic, thinking, and these kind of things, prior to which we were an illiterate, irrational people. So they got us all these things. So these are the kind of narratives that are continued even today, thanks to this flagship idea of theirs that there is Aryan invasion theory. That is the central cause for all these bigoted narratives. So what we are seeing is, whenever the Westerners encounter evidence contrary to their assertions, they have an option. They have an option. The option is our assumption wrong? What can we do about it? How do we accommodate this Indian data point that we have here? They always chose the path that Indian methods are wrong. Indians did not know what they were talking about, or their methods are corrupted, and it requires a superior Western science and white man's burden and all those things to correct their records. For example, when William Jones, when he wrote in a diary, after reading all of this Indian chronology and looking at Purana chronology going back to enormous antiquity, he declared in a letter that either the first 8 chapters of Genesis are wrong and our national religion is false, or we need to do something about the Indian records. So they took the path that they are right, the arrogance that they are right, and the Indian records are wrong. So you see, Sanjayji, this is the trajectory that has been set throughout Western academia, perhaps starting with William Jones and Max Muller, going all the way down to present times, carried forward today by Nehruvian socialists, Marxists, and others who continue in the same lineage. So this is what we have. We have an utterly bigoted narrative that arises from the ideologies of various entities who had a vested interest in controlling the historiography of India. That is what we are observing.
Okay. So that is the brief introduction today, viewers. Just to start you off on the journey, where would you trace the first traces of science in India?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So we see that the earliest Indian wisdom has always been in the form of stories. So our ancestors found that if there's some phenomena in which they understood what is happening, how do you explain it in a vocabulary that the common man understands and that learning is going to stay through time? So they couch that in stories and metaphors and things of this nature, drawing from the palette of divinities and ideas and notions, and in an entertaining capsule, if you will. So ancient Indians initially observed a natural phenomena. things like, for example, the moon appears to rise every day in a different part in a different time, about 48 to 50 minutes late. It changes, by the way, against a different backdrop of the skies, and it takes 27 days to come back to the same backdrop of the sky. So that was the beginning of the sidereal month, that the moon takes 27 days to come back to the same backdrop of stars. And that was the beginning of the nakshatra model, that they could divide the sky into 27 segments. The ecliptic is a path where the sun and the moon appear to traverse. They divided that in 27 segments and called it the nakshatras. They also observed that the moon is going through phases. From Amavasya to Paurnami back to Amavasya, they saw that it is taking approximately 30 days. So the Tithi was important, computation of Tithi, and they observed approximately 29.5 or 30 days. Let's round it to 30 days. So they had the sidereal month, and the synodic month is based on the phases. Then the Indians had also observed that the sun appears to be offsetting in the sky. Every day when it rises is offsetting, going north, 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 northernmost point, then coming south, 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 up to the southernmost point. So they refer to this phenomenon as Uttarayana and Dakshinayana, and they could precisely measure the solar year to be 365.24 days. So Indians had these three things. They had the synodic month, sidereal month, solar year, and they wanted to find synchronisms between these things in order to mark the passage of time. Passage of time was a very, very important thing in the Indian context. So we find enormous intellectual activity going back to Rig Veda. Rig Veda itself was talking about the year of 360 days. And then we find Atharva Veda, which is talking about Adhika Masa, that Rohita created Adhika Masa, that is there in Atharva Veda. So there is every notion of calendrical development appears to be very, very ancient as far as India is concerned. There's a different question, how old is the Rig Veda? How old are these things? A different question. But as ancient as some of these oral traditions, we have had this calendar system. So we have three phenomena: sidereal month, synodic month, solar month, seeking synchronism, lunar month of 360 days in 12 months, and that is divided with Adhika Masa. You bring back into synchronism with the solar year, insertion of a special month every so often. Every 5 years, you average it out, it comes to 365.24 days. We find this. Then we find other things. They said Muhurta. Muhurta is the basic unit of the day, and there are 30 Muhurtas in a day. And from the Muhurta was born several other ideas. Eventually, Indians had the Panchanga. Panchanga was a 5-dimensional measure where you measure the nakshatra of the day, tithi of the day, the yoga, karana, and vara. And with this, they were able to talk about the passage of time. So we are seeing that the antiquity of Indian mathematics and astronomy go back to enormous antiquity in the oral tradition itself. We are seeing observations of eclipses, observations of transit, conjunction phenomena. All these things are referred to in ancient texts. Sometimes these are couched as stories, and we have to unlock the wisdom in the stories by understanding the metaphor. Sometimes it is explicit, and we understand this is what the information they intended to communicate. So, Sanjay ji, I think the mathematics and astronomy go back to great antiquity to answer your question. And in parallel, ever since Indians have been Indians, we have had also medicine. So, medicine also has got a very, very long antiquity, going back to very, very ancient times, much of which we see in Atharva Veda, for example, but even prior to that, we see that. So different streams of knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, there is great antiquity. We cannot put our finger and say, here is where it started, this is the inventor where it started. From the oral traditions, it's apparent that this civilization has had these notions for a very long time.
Vibhuti ji, you want to ask any questions?
Oh, yes. I want to ask questions behind the curtain, that there are no stupid questions, only stupid answers. So this is a subject matter I know very little about. Uh, but 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 then asking a question is the beginning of learning, right? So Raji, you have virtually assumed a guru-esque stature, and I applaud you for that. It's a pleasure to meet you today.
Thank you.
As a, I bought a T-shirt at Delhi airport. Uh, Google can give you information, but for knowledge you need a guru. So we are in front of you today. I'm seeking that knowledge from you. Is that, you talked about Carl Sagan. Was it ignorance? My question is, was it deliberate? Because the Western people have stolen that. This is a historical fact now. We know that now. So
Right.
whether it was numerical notations which traveled from India to Arab world and became Arabic notations,
Right.
you talk about the zero, you talk about decimal system, Shushruta, everything has Indian Hindu origin. It all got stolen. And
Right.
my question here is the fact that how did we allow the brilliant scientific temper that our ancients had to be decimated by the invaders? They stole everything. And we became reliant upon things Western as superior to things that was our very own. So the point which I'm trying to ask you and inquire from you is what led to the destruction of our scientific temper that we did not fight, resist, or cultivate it again? Whether it would lead to modern unicorn, invention, innovation, we were all there.
Right.
It's there in Mahabharata and Ramayana and Bhagavad Gita. You read it, it's all there.
Right.
Thinking as well. I mean, stealing of our ability for cognitive reasoning and logic and everything is all there.
Right. Right.
How did we let it happen? And how are we
Right.
letting it happen even today?
Right. So we can take this the main thrust of our talk today along two segments, and one is the impact of, if we go backwards in time from current times, the
Yeah,
impact of Christianity comes, then Islam, then again Christianity in the past. Christianity comes twice in this. It's
yeah,
a dual appearance. So starting from the recent times, we know about the impact of colonialism. Even today, India is reeling under the impact of colonialism. It is not as if suddenly, magically, 1947 is all gone, our destiny is in our own hands. No such rubbish. I think we are bearing the impact. Even today, we are suffering under that. So, talking about colonial period, the British, like I said, William Jones and others who came to India, they came with a biblical point of view. They were Anglican church people who believed that God had created the world 4004 BCE and destroyed the world, Noah's flood 3000 BCE. Nothing could have survived a flood event except the descendants of Noah. And when they saw the Indian records that predate that, they said, oh my goodness, we have a problem here. We need to correct it because Indians don't know how to do any of these measurements or understanding of time and such things. So they went through a process of distortion. So the distortion in our calendrical system started with people like William Jones. It was carried forward once this commonality of languages was found by Eurocentric linguists, ranging from Germany to elsewhere in Europe. A whole lot of people jumped to the bandwagon trying to say, yes, there's a common people, common language, Proto-Indo-European, and this is how the migration happened. All these kind of narrations started out again Eurocentric, again distorting the civilizational history of India. That's the second thing that happened. The third, along with missionaries who had come into, so the missionaries were at the forefront of translations. We need to understand that. They were at the forefront of learning Sanskrit and trying to translate the Puranas, Vedas, and every such thing. As they were translating, they were aware that these texts are a direct existential challenge to the Bible and other such things. So the distortion started in their translations itself. We are seeing that too. Overall, today, with the luxury of hindsight, we can say that the British practiced ethnocide in India. They practiced ethnocide with 5 mechanisms. So we can count that. I've talked about how the British created poverty in India. India was a very prosperous country. I've talked about that in the past. 35% of the world GDP in the beginning of the Common Era, and then falling by about 10% over 1,000 years. If the trajectory had continued to 2,000 years, we'd still be somewhere around 20% or 15% of the world GDP. But we are not. We are somewhere at 4% or so. And the reason is because in the 1700s period, we see a rapid downfall in the fortunes of India. And there are enough number of people who have talked about the impoverishment of India. So British impoverishment is the first mechanism of ethnocide. That is followed by the missionary activity, missionaries who wanted to convert Indians. So the destruction of religion by their coming in atrocity literature, creating fracture points and other such things. They destroyed several things, self-esteem and other such things. Third is the invention of caste. So the identity itself of Indians was hit directly by corrupting the jati varna system, which they were completely aware of, force fitting it into the notion of caste and stratifying and making that stagnant rather. So they were able to do that. So the invention of caste and the breakdown of identity because of that. Then we have the corruption of our history itself. Our history has been corrupted tremendously, and I told you about the chronology issues and all of those kinds of things. Then the so-called English Education Act of 1825 with the Macaulay and the others. So they decided that we are going to alienate these Indians so much from their background by forcing them to learn English. So they withdrew any funding for Sanskrit or Arabic or schools or whatever, and said all funds will only go for English education. You want a clerk job, you better know English. So this forced, along with poverty, the breakdown of education system in India and the adoption of English. So as far as the very recent history of India is concerned, we find British ethnocide led directly to a collapse of the Indian knowledge systems. So one might have said that, wait a minute, it was not that pervasive. Maybe by 1947, things would have been different and so on. Unfortunately, 1947, this Fabian socialism of Nehru came into the picture, where they were of the same boycotted views as Karl Marx and other Marxists to follow later in India. They believe all history is a history of class conflicts. So they came with a bigoted lens of looking at all social dynamics in India is a story of class dynamics. Who is against whom, who oppressed whom, that person is oppressed by this person, and so on and so forth. So they created enormous tensions at the micro level in India by doing this kind of thinking. That is the first thing. Second, they believe that change will come on the back of a revolution. That change is necessary because we need the old order is corrupted. That's the assumption. First starting axiom or assumption is old order is corrupted. To destroy the old order, you need a revolution. And you have to replace it with a utopian classless society. This is their thinking. So the Nehruvian socialists believe that change can come in under the democratic ages, whereas the Marxists believe in bloody revolution. Just go and kill the intellectuals and others of the old order, we get a new. That's the only difference between them. Otherwise, they're joined at the hip. So Nehruvian socialists took over 1947 with this utterly bigoted view in looking at all of Hinduism as backward, primitive, to be thrown away, and all these kind of things, and looking at the so-called adoption of Western methods as modernity as the way for India. So the problem is, these are not at loggerheads. That's what my talks always say. What you call as Western science is a continuation of Indian thought with an interruption of about 500 years. That is not realized by our people, but they went with killing the old ways, say the old ways irrelevant. That is a problem. Since 1971, we know Indira Gandhi, who made a pact with the devil literally for political survival. And since then, Narul Hassan and so many social sciences institute created by the Marxists and manned by the Marxists by edging out the emic practitioner. After 1971 to today, about 50 years, there is no person or professor of Indian-leaning, Indian lens-based knowledge in any position of power in academia, in any university in India, because it's so pervasively controlled by these people. So this is the most recent destruction of the Indian learning ecosystem by these people, because everything in India to them is bigoted. There's a rotten, primitive, old, superstitious to be discarded. They don't have the ability to see it otherwise because their ideology demands that. So I talked about the present time. I talked to the colonialists. Let me go a little back to the Islam people now. So since 711 or so, when Bin Qasim invaded in Sindh, they were able to take pundits like Kanka, and they were able to take them to Baghdad, forcibly kidnap them to Baghdad and converted them and forced them to convert Sanskrit texts into Persian and Arabic. So that is what they did. So we know that texts like Brahmagupta's works, Shushruta Samhita, Charaka Samhita, all these things are translated into Arabic. That is how these people living in Baghdad and places like that, prior to that, they were practically literate. This is how they got to know mathematics, place value, geometry, and all these things, in addition by inheriting old Greek texts, which were in turn, again, Indian knowledge. We'll come to that later. So this is how Arabs got it. But then Arabs, after Sindh, we had a period of quiet for about 300 years because of the Rajput kings and Rajasthan, they were, or Gujarat kings, they were preventing the Arabs from coming in. But after Ghazni came, first thing he did was destroyed this Jyotirlinga temple in Haryana. And that was a great center of learning. So that was destroyed. Several other temples, all the way up to Somnath, and several invasions this man destroyed. Each of them was a center of excellence and center of learning. Everywhere where there was a major temple in India was literally university, where pundits were there, people were there learning and all these kind of things, all gone. Then Gori came along and Gori did his nonsense. Then his murderous acts, rather. And then you have Bakhtiyar Khilji and other Delhi Sultanate people who did enormous damage. We see, for example, Ujjain. Ujjain was a center of astronomy and mathematics in India. The center. If you wanted to learn astronomy and mathematics wherever you were, you will go to Ujjain. That is the way it was. Mahakaleshwar temple over there. That's where you'd go. In fact, Bhaskara II, he was a professor at Ujjain. And where was he from? He was from Karnataka. From Karnataka, he migrated to Ujjain and he became the professor there. He was teaching over there. Leelavati, everything was written when he was over there. And so sadly, less than 100 years after Bhaskara II was when this Delhi Sultanate people came, destroyed the entire ecosystem over there. So astronomy was gone. That part of it, at least in Ujjain, that it was gone over there. So we are seeing that Islamic invasion starting from Bin Qasim, continuing to Ghazni and Gori, then the Delhi Sultanate, followed by the Mughals. The Mughals are utterly bigoted people. We all know about Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb, for example, not only destroyed several temples and universities, he also prevented sammelans of Vedic Pandits on the banks of Ganga. You could not even have a sammelan with 10, 15 people listening to your discourse and teaching. His soldiers even prevented that. There's a firman that talks about even that preventing these kind of things. So the learning was pervasively stopped by them. And of course, we all know Bakhtiyar Khilji and Nalanda and what happened over there. We know about that also. So the Islamic period was one of great destruction. In fact, what we see is in India, we see some of the great scientists and astronomers were in the northern part. It is not as if to say there were nobody in the southern part. They were in the southern part also, but the northern part, Aryabhatta, Varaha Mihira, Bhaskara I, Bhaskara II, so many people lived there prior to the Islamic invasions. Once the Islamic invasion started and took root, we see there is no more science and technology in the northern part of India. However, in the southern part of India, under the protection of the Vijayanagar Empire, over a period of 300 years, Vijayanagar Empire put a stop, literally the Great Wall of India, preventing the Muslims from coming to the south. Under the protection of the Hindu Vijayanagar Empire, we are seeing the encouragement, patronage of science, technology, mathematics, and other such things. And all the great mathematicians, astronomers are in southern India after Islamic invasion. Madhava, Parameshwara, Nilakanta Somayaji, Mahendra Suri, so many others. We can Kamala Kara, we can talk about so many people who lived in southern part of India, nothing in northern part of India. So what it is telling you is in Islamic period, there was a wiping out northern India of the learning ecosystem, which migrated to the south under Vijayanagar. Once Vijayanagar was destroyed with the Bahmani sultans, once again there was a purging of Indian knowledge system for a short period of time. After that, the Nayaka rulers, who were the chieftains under Vijayanagar, they took over. The Maratha rulers, who were also chieftains under the Vijayanagar, they took over. That's the Shivaji is in that lineage. So they took over. They were able to protect until such time the colonial people came. When the colonial people came, you see that is also erased. Even the southern India, the traditional knowledge is erased. So this is now I've covered from modern period, which is the socialists, the Marxists, the colonial period, the Islamic period. Prior to that, we had to look at what is Christianity did. It's a double entry of Christianity. Christianity came at a time about 330 current era. All this nonsense about Jesus Christ in 30 current eras is all subjective. One has got to look into the evidence for that. The evidence appears to be Pauline's epistles. Paul is the epistles of Paul and other such things. Anyway, but bottom line is that 330 current era, Constantine adopted Christianity as a state religion of the Roman Empire. His successor was Theodosius. That Theodosius was an example of the Talibanic madman. So he was a Talibanic Christian, literally, you can say. So he destroyed all the old centers of learning in the Roman Empire, which means the Greek libraries, the Greek temples, any so called pagan knowledge was seen as against Christianity, and they destroyed just about everything over there. Until such time, Greece had strong contact with India, and they were learning from Indians, and a lot of Indian knowledge is preserved in ancient Greece, Library of Alexandria, and places like that. All of that was purged by the early Christians through about 300 to 400 year period. They went through this. So some of the method Theodosius used was burning libraries, killing people, and only giving jobs to Christians. If you wanted a job in the state, then you had to be a Christian. You could not get it if you're a so-called pagan. So many people even left the place. So we are seeing Christianity was one of the primary reasons why the Roman Empire fell into dark ages. See, the Roman Empire came in 145 BCE after a war with the Greek Empire. So after that war, the ascendancy of Rome can be seen. So Rome adopted all the Greek gods, Greek learning, Greek everything. They adopted that from 145 BCE until Constantine in 330 current era. So in 330 current era, adoption of Christianity, and they promptly fell into dark ages. Promptly, literally, right over there. So the Talibanic kind of fervor which they came against rationality, against logic, against learning, but their only goal was believe in Christ and believe the only way to Father is through the Son. All these theologies are developing at that time, so that's the only way to do it. So once learning was gone, they were gone all through until the so-called age of Reformation and age of rationalism. They were a gone case in dark ages. It's only after that we see European sciences. And again, European sciences, we can talk about it later, how it grew from ancient Indian sciences. We can see that connection also. So I think to answer your question, Vibhuti Ji, we are seeing that the destruction of Indian knowledge happened in several waves. It happened from the Greeks, from the once transmission to Greeks had happened, and Roman Empire, Constantine Christianity, destroyed in Europe and Dark Ages. We are seeing that. Bin Qasim and Delhi Sultanate and Mughals, we're seeing destruction in India. Then colonial period all the way through Max Muller, William Jones, Max Muller, and the rest, and to Macaulay and the rest, we are seeing destruction through ethnocide, British ethnocide. Then from Nehru, we are seeing destruction in independent India from 1947. From Indira Gandhi, we are continuing to see the destruction until today. Till today, nothing has been done to change the ecosystem. So the destruction that started from Constantine Christianity of Indian knowledge systems continues till the present day. This is what we are seeing.
Okay, just want to
Question.
ask you
Just
about
one second. I
the.
just asked a question and we got a fabulous education on that. Thank you, Raji. It is a pleasure to be listening to you. And I would encourage all the viewers, ask questions. Today is the day to get your knowledge, not from Google, but from the Guru himself. Sorry, Sanjay,
Okay,
go ahead.
yeah. Uh, I just want to focus on the methods of interpretation that the Westerners employed and why we've not been able to point out the deficiencies there. Because our systems of what we call our concepts of time, our concepts of logic, our
Right,
epistemology,
right,
all of them are fundamentally different from the
right,
Westerners' point of view.
right,
For instance, when a Westerner goes to interpret the Vedas, he goes and looks at the words, whereas in
right,
India, the tradition has always been to look at the Vedas not as words and not as a book, but as a knowledge system.
right,
And you look at the words only in order to decipher what kind of knowledge they are leading you to.
right,
And that is in consonance with our four dimensional system where we have what is called the Adhibhautik, Adhidaivik, Adhyatmik, and Para.
right,
And of course, this Para is completely missing from the Western Western worldview. So I have this problem with a lot of these interpretations, and these Westerners, when I have arguments with them, they simply seem to miss out the point completely, unless they are schooled somewhat in the Indian systems. And they completely miss out the point that they are interpreting something which is aimed much higher from a much lower standpoint.
Very true. Very true. Let me address that. That's an excellent question. Excellent question. It is an existential question for the Western civilization and about ancient Indian thought. It's really an existential, because if you go back to epistemology itself and look at Indian knowledge systems, for the longest time we had a Shruti, the Smriti. Among the Smriti, we got the Vedangas, we got different kinds of knowledge systems, the Pramanas and the Shaddarshanas. We have got various ways in which knowledge was admitted in ancient India. All the different sampradayas who looked at different means of knowledge generation always saw, how do we acquire knowledge about ourselves. That was the primary motive of the Indian civilization, which is to dispel avidya from our minds about our true nature and acquire that we are part of Brahman. This was the understanding that we were going towards. And whichever area of science that you studied or whatever, eventually the goal was towards understanding the truth. So, a one line description of the Indian civilization is, a Hindu is a person who is a seeker of knowledge. So, it does not matter whether you're doing in mathematics, astronomy, or philosophy, or anything. Eventually, any knowledge system studied deeply enough will become philosophical. You will come to existential questions, you will come to epistemological questions, you will come to a notion where you say, which is the worldview that best describes the cosmos as we see it today. And what we are seeing is, our ancient rishis understood this beautifully. They said there is no dichotomy, there's no such thing as creator is here, creation is there. Everything is Brahman. We are part of Brahman. And to understand that is a great learnings required on our part, to remove the avidya, to remove the maya of our existence, understand the impermanence of objects, understand where everything is interconnected, understand our role over here. So we have the pramanas to guide us, we have the various Vedangas to guide us, we have the various other things to guide us and learn. It's not only a question of just reading them and going with a static view. Every time in India, we are seeing a growth of knowledge systems. If you take, for example, astronomy, I start talking about sidereal month, synodic month. By the time you come to Aryabhatta, you got trigonometry, spherical geometry. By the time you come to Nilakanta Somayaji, you got partial heliocentric model. Continuous tradition of knowledge growth we're seeing, not stagnation, a dynamic tradition. That is what we're seeing. So this is how, in epistemology, we can say Indians were seekers of knowledge and truth. This is what a scientist does today. A scientist looks at the phenomenon. He sees, what have others talked about this phenomenon in the past? What has been their assumptions and understandings? Where does their understanding break down? Is this the problem over here? How can I advance this learning? This is what a scientist would do today. This is exactly what our rishis also did. By contemplation, by sadhana, by observing, by measurements, experiments, they were able to advance knowledge. On the other hand, ever since Judaism came on the scene, but I'll start my story with Christianity. Christianity came on the scene, we can see that it has been one of you shall obey. Your goal in life was one of you need salvation because you're fallen, you're a sinner. And because you're a sinner, you need the grace of God to admit you to everlasting life in the afterlife. Otherwise, eternal damnation in purgatory. This is the way they saw it. And Islam came along and said the same old things, that yes, unless through the mercy of Allah and you believe Muhammad is the last prophet, all these things, you'll be admitted in Jannat, others, you'll be eternal purgatory in hell. This is the way they saw things. So in their philosophies, knowledge does not matter. Knowledge is inconsequential to the goal of civilization of Jannat. Inconsequential. It does not matter. It's just a footnote in the Islamic civilization. It does not exist in the Christian civilization about knowledge and other things. Your only goal is to obey. Obey the divine dictated law which the Gospels have written about Christ. Only way to the Father is through the Son. Or Muhammad heard from Archangel Gabriel and he wrote down the Quran, and the Hadiths came later on, all these kind of things. You only believe these things, otherwise you are destined for hell. Knowledge does not matter. So we are seeing that there is a difference in the epistemology between the Indian civilization and the Abrahamic outgrowths. I refuse to call them civilizations. So we are seeing a difference right over there. Then how did they accommodate knowledge? If you look at the ancient history, Greeks readily took Indian knowledge. Babylonians readily took Indian knowledge. Romans readily took Indian knowledge because they were not subscribing to this notion of a jealous monotheistic God who hates everybody else, us and them dynamic. They are not seeing any of those things. They were taking Indian divinities and mapping it to their divinities and using, as long as they were like that, they had learning, rationality. Constantine Christianity, Theodosius changed the equation, dark ages for them. Islam came along, and once again, dark ages and their own problems. They had Baghdad House of Wisdom, true, but they went through periods of great ignorance and illiteracy too in that culture. And we are seeing that when the rediscovery of India happened through the colonial people, their rediscovery rather, they found that look at this Indian knowledge system, it's so advanced. So they had two options, like I said: do we accept it, or do we force fit it to the biblical chronology? So they force fit it to biblical chronology in 1700s and so on. Reformation happened somewhere around that time. This Reformation was a movement in their society where they were fed up with the papal bulls of Catholic Church and other such things. And the Protestants went, so-called Protestants, they revolted, and they formed, through Martin Luther and others, they formed their own movements and such things. Therein was born the age of rationalism, because coincidentally at that time colonialism had started and they're starting to learn Indian literature. People like Voltaire and others were learning Upanishads. Do you know how? Upanishads they were learning through Dara Shikoh's translations. Dara Shikoh, the unfortunate brother of Aurangzeb, he was very Indic in his thinking. He had translated the Upanishads into Persian, and that had found its way into France, translated into French, and they got their first glimpse after Greek contact with Indian thought this way, and they were blown away by this kind of a worldview, which is completely different from "you shall obey," became "you shall seek." And that gave rise to the age of rationalism. People like Voltaire, people like so many other of the great thinkers over there, it started there. That also was a time when poor old man Darwin took this beagle ship and went to the Galapagos Island, and he discovered that, observing the natural world over there, he said that there appears to be something like natural selection. So something like natural selection is at work, and he proposed theory of evolution and things like that, causing a great furor in Europe and Americas at that time, saying, no, it's not possible. We are not related to apes. God made us in his image. We are perfect. We are made in his image. How can we be related to this? So there caused a great dichotomy over there, because science was coming and saying all these things, and Christian theology was saying something else. So we have to take the story a little back to Copernicus, who was even scared of talking about heliocentric model at that time because it was against the church injunctions. Galileo had to recant. Galileo looked and said about the heliocentrism in addition. He had to recant all that because it was against the church thinking. So church had an option. Do we go with science, or do we uphold our theology? The theology is demanding God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. And he had made man in his image, perfectly in his image. And he made Eve inferiorly out of man's rib. This is the thinking. Then the fall of man and all these things. So do we uphold that? Or do we go with our natural, rational observations, logical thinking, experiments? Do we do that? They chose the latter, saying that if you say these things, Galileo, blasphemy, you'll be killed. So recant. And they even burnt a fellow called Bruno at the stake, because Bruno had adopted the Indian thinking that the cosmos is infinite. And he was describing infinity. They burnt him at the stake of the Vatican. If you go to Vatican today, behind that is a fountain square. That is where they burnt him. So this is how they reacted. But by the time we come to Darwin, this age of rationalism for them had started then. Indians had pramanas. We were seekers. We questioned everything. We don't need rationalism, logic. We can give lessons to them on those things. But in that society, coming out of "you are a believer and you shall believe and follow," coming from that philosophy to suddenly looking at the natural world and trying to express it in mathematics, trying to express it in logic, it was new. So you see clashes in that society. For example, theory of evolution, that caused Christian fundamentalists to go on rampage. About Galileo and others, that caused them to go on rampage. So many things came, science came into direct conflict with Christian theology. and they could not deal with that. So this reformation and rationalism gave them an excuse in the French society to say secularism. We separate the church and the state. And we say that all affairs of the church are in a different domain. You do what you like over there. Over here, we shall secularly, rationally, we shall examine science and see where this is taking us. So that separation was critical for them, because in that society, science and theology cannot coexist, because they are believers. They have to believe, otherwise, blasphemy, head chopped off. So you had to go over there. So the only way to deal with this problem was to separate these two and go with it. Indians, no such thing. We are seeing forever science and philosophies intertwined in the Indian thinking, in the context of metaphors, in the context of stories, in the context of understanding how to see the natural world in a way that we remember. We are seeing this forever. For example, Ayurveda. Ayurveda, according to Surendranath Dasgupta, one of our philosophers in 1930 or so, he said, Ayurveda can be seen in India under two categories. It saw it as ill health is appearing because of poor diet. If ill health comes because of poor diet, it requires methods of Ayurveda to cure you. On the other track, is saying ill health can also happen because of karma phala, that you have done something bad or whatever karma, bad karma, got that, and you need prayaschitta and methods of prayaschitta and Atharva Veda practices to cure you. So we are seeing today in modern world, we can cast it as follows. We can say one of them is physiological problems, other one is psychological problems. How do you deal with the fact that you're born as a cripple or blind or other such things? Inequities of life bear on you. You say, why is everybody else better than me? Why am I alone cursed like this? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the problems of life when you have some handicap? So we can say that, yes, this was one way of looking at physiological, one way of looking at psychological issues and dealing with it. Or the other way to see it also is that it existed perfectly. Shushruta did enormous compendiums of medical knowledge. Charaka did enormous compendiums, so as Vagbhata and others. They had no problem with having the metaphor of Indian knowledge systems, Indian divinities coming into their works and describing these things. So what we're seeing again and again is that Indians had no clash with philosophy of the land and with the sciences they were exploring, because we were seekers of the truth. What is Brahman? The big capital T truth. We are going after that. And because of that, we had no dichotomy. Even today, I, as a scientist, proudly say I'm a Hindu. And that's the only way I can be a scientist also. Whereas in the so-called Western world, if you're a scientist, you have to discard your religion at the footstep of your office, of your laboratory before you enter. Otherwise, you cannot. All this intelligent creationism is nonsense. It's an attempt to, again, coalesce Christian theology with science. It's all utter nonsense. So bottom line, to address your question on epistemology, Sanjay ji, we see because of these fundamental ideas, Indians have had no problem in addressing science, learning, truth, philosophy. It's natural for us. It is who we are. There is no paradox in my thinking as a scientist with anything with Hinduism. Whereas Christian scientist, it could be an oxymoron, but you have to deal with issues of science and theological beliefs. You have to deal with those things. So we don't have that. And the Muslims, obviously the same. Muslims can't believe in theory of evolution. Muslims can't believe in many, many things, even heliocentrism, because they believe the sun sets into a muddy pool and things of that nature. So unless you have expedient interpretations of these things, it's impossible for them to reconcile their theology and science. That is what we are seeing.
Well, as far as the Islamic theology is concerned, even today, their Maulanas, they go around saying that sun goes around the earth, and one of the foundational, what is called the theologians, Ahmad Raza Barelvi, who founded the Barelvi order, he's written a 3-volume tome proving that the sun goes around the earth. So
Over there, Sanjay ji, let me add there. People often say, what about Indians? They also believe in geocentric model. True. When Indians started, the frame of reference was geocentric frame of reference. Aryabhatta, when he got his epicycle model of the solar system, he said geocentric Earth, And but then Aryabhatta already knew about the ecliptic. So he had something called an equant, which is away from the center. And he also had a multi-epicycle model. He had an epicycle model with something called a Shigra and a Manda, which are two epicycles. Very complicated model. But the bottom line is he had a Earth-centric frame of reference, the ecliptic coordinate system, and he was able to describe the motion of heavenly bodies perfectly. No problem at all. He was able to do it with trigonometry, understand motion of Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Moon, and everything. Mars, he was able to do all of these things, Venus, and no issues at all. Then we are seeing that in the development of mathematics, Vedanga Jyotisha, if you go to 1400 BC, that is the one that is telling you how to track the heavenly bodies using a linear mathematical equation. Vedanga Jyotisha has got something called rule of three, which it says apply repeatedly again and again. Look at Kompana Shastri translation, Vedanga Jyotisha, you'll find it there. One of the verses there is saying, today we recognize it by the familiar mathematics. Mathematics says A by B equal to C by X. If that ratio, if you take, then X is equal to cross multiplication BC divided by A. We are seeing that in Vedanga Jyotisha, where, for example, using the many instruments that are known from Harappa times to Aryabhatta to we have many astronomical instruments. If you measure that a heavenly body has moved a distance of delta S in time delta T, they had water clocks and things like that to measure the passage of time. You could ask the question, in some other time, capital T, how much will this move? Using this rule of three, you could find out that it was multiply delta S divided by delta T times T, and you'll find how much it has moved. That's a linear extrapolation of your current time to a projected future time. And Vedanga Jyotisha is saying repeatedly apply that, which means it knows iteration. You must do it repeatedly to get the correct result. So we are seeing this in 1400 BC in India. But in the Western experience, they are saying that it is Babylon, which is first track movement of Venus, movement of Jupiter, and other things in 800 BC. Utter nonsense. This is much earlier here. But anyway, why did I say that? I said that because from Vedanga Jyotisha, you come to Aryabhatta, he's got sine, cos, nonlinear functions. He's saying linear is not enough. I need nonlinear. I need properties of right angle triangle. I need spherical geometry to understand this. By the time you come to Brahmagupta, he's got second order interpolation formulas, all in mathematics, basically trying to take a nonlinear function and have first term, second term, and try to understand these things. By the time you come to Madhava of Kerala, he's got infinite series for sine, the nonlinear functions. So we are seeing a continuous understanding of the Indian models from geocentric model of Aryabhatta through more and more mathematics, better and better refinements. By the time you come to Bhaskara II, he's got a pulsating epicycle model, very, very, very accurate. But it's also there in Surya Siddhanta, by the way. And by the time you go to Nilakanta Somayaji, he's saying, okay, let the earth be the frame of reference. And the sun is going around the earth and the moon is going around the earth. But all the planets, which is Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, are going around the sun. So he's saying all the planets are going around the sun, and sun and all these planets in turn are going around the earth. So you're seeing partial heliocentric model 100 years before they found out in Europe. Tycho Brahe, for example, used the same model of Nilakanta Somayaji 150 years later in Europe. So why am I saying this? In India, we were not hard and fast to some injunction in some sacred text that said geocentric model, believe that. Whereas in some other tradition, if Muhammad, the perfect person, said that, they can't contradict it. They have to go with it. There's no way you can change it. You have to go. If the Genesis said 6-day creation and such thing, you have to go with it. You can't change it. Whereas in India, we were not held by blasphemy laws or any such thing to seeking of knowledge. We are seeing a continuous evolution in the knowledge systems of India over time. From Rig Veda, Vedanga Jyotisha, Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta, Bhaskara II to Nilakanta Somayaji, all the way to Patani Samanta Chandrasekhar of Odisha, we are seeing a continuous evolution in the classical knowledge of India, mathematics, and so on. So such a tradition is one where we will eventually find the knowledge systems, if not for the interruption we had with the Islamics and the colonialists and the socialists and Marxists. If not for these interventions, classical India would have developed tremendously good models and such things, given that we never had this issue of blasphemy, separation, secularism, and all this nonsense.
Right, right. And before we go to the audience questions, Vibhuti ji,
I have one thing. I had read about all that how Indian wisdom, science, and technology was taken away from us. Today, by listening to you, you have proved a scientific theory very valid. You learn more by listening. Thank you very much, Rajji. So that's one part which is very important. But the element is that you talked about heliocentric model, binary, algorithm. These are all Indian intuitive knowledge base.
Right,
They have all been systematically stolen by us,
right,
including the atomic part of it. Like
right.
Kanad was
Kanada's,
born even
Rishi
before
Kanada's
John
model.
Bolton was born, conceived or wherever. So the question is it is everything stolen like this? Is that the reason why the West insists and established a patent formula, patent act to protect what they had stolen, actually, not protect what they had created? And this is what they are putting pressure on us, that India has no patent laws. Hey, you stole everything from us. Actually,
Right.
you should give it back to us. So the politically speaking now, where do we go from here? How does the current generation of Indians become entrepreneurs, become innovators, become unicorns by relying on their own, or relying upon the West as the stolen guys, those people who destroyed us? We need a
Right.
cultural revolution, in my opinion, right now. We need a massive cultural revolution right now.
Very true, very true, very true. So your question is very, very complicated, Vibhuti ji. So a lot of angles to it, lot of angles, no simple answer. There are so many angles to this.
I will
But
quote
let
you Einstein's quote here. It is, any intelligent fool can complicate a simple problem. I did just now. You said that, but now you have to unravel that simplicity.
so no, I wouldn't describe it that way. But going back, like you said, all these inventions, if you go to Pingala, Hemachandra, or Mahavira and others, we see combinatorics over there. If you go to atomic theory, you see Rishi Kanada over there. Much before Democritus came to India and studied Kanada's theory and repeated it in Greece. And we see mathematics, like I said, people like Hipparchus did not have trigonometry; they had chord tables, and it is we see trigonometry for the first time in Surya Siddhanta, right angle triangles. Surya Siddhanta, from that Aryabhatta. So any knowledge system you take prior to the Islamic invasion, we are seeing that had origins in India and were exported out. And because of the existential problems of Abrahamic traditions, we are seeing some of the issues that you talked about today. What do I mean by that? For example, like I said, if Indian knowledge system is old, then you had to deal with the fact that Genesis is a false account. Christianity is wrong. Can't deal with that. So you have to now say Aryan invasion happened. India is a young civilization. Contact with Greeks made them civilized. And prior to that, they had no civilization. Plus, it's backward, they are caste ridden. All these kind of constructs come because of these five frameworks that I said: the colonial framework, Eurocentric framework, the missionary framework, the socialist, leftist academia framework, Marxist framework. These five frameworks are controlling historiography of India even today to advance their bigoted ideologies, to control the Indian diaspora, Indian minds, and everything with the bigoted ideas. And on the West, they are very happy with it because it coincides with their project, which is to show the superiority of the Western civilization. Therefore, any science and technology must have come from ancient Greeks, then a period of silence during the Dark Ages, then suddenly a rediscovery of Greek knowledge through the Arabs and the Indians, and the glorious Western Renaissance and other such things. We are seeing existential problems there, Eurocentric ideas there, and other such things there also. So today, unfortunately, in India, these five frameworks are controlling the historiography. So any kid coming out of the Indian education system or even the Western education system is learning this rubbish. Utter concocted, distorted rubbish is being filled, propaganda has been filled into their heads. So by the time they graduate in the 12th standard with the kind of history and social studies, we are raving leftist maniacs, literally going around talking about the corrupted Indian civilization, caste system, cow, that, this, and all our people are primitive. They had, if you, the minute you say Jyotisha in Vedanga Jyotisha, they'll say, oh, horoscope. That is the kind of nonsense to which pedestrian level to which we have been reduced. where we cannot even connect with the enormous mathematical, astronomical tradition, continuous growth in models and such things that we have had. So this is the level of ignorance which we have been left by these forces. So you asked, how can the modern Indian youth get out of this and be an entrepreneur unfettered by these kind of ideas? I think it calls for people with great awakening. The tamas must be gone completely from their mind, literally, or at least a significant portion of it should be out of their mind, where they're able to read the works of several thought leaders in the space. There are several people who have written books. Sanjay Dixit ji has also written a book, Sai Deepak, and several others, Rajiv Malhotra, and several others have written books trying to awaken some of these notions in us. So that we see all these forces acting on us, and we are able to take hold of our own narrative. That getting hold of our own narrative has not been done by the BJP for the last so many years. Much could have been done, but has not been done. Maybe because they're ignorant of these issues. I don't know. I cannot be an apologist for them, but they've not done it. So the picture continues. If Bhagavan forbid, if it turns out that these people are also out of power and the Congress UPA comes back to power, this destruction will continue accelerated. If you can say that the destruction is not accelerated, but is somewhat slowly we are destroying ourselves now, it will become an accelerated destruction in the future with these forces. So I do not see us reclaiming our narrative. We are already on a hugely declining curve in terms of understanding our knowledge systems, our past. There is a great awakening happening today. I'll admit that. There is a great awakening happening today because there is lot of thirst, civilizational thirst is there in our people to understand who are we, what are we. And I'm finding that more and more in the talks that I give, more and more people are reading, commenting, understanding, and trying to propagate these ideas on social media. A lot of ignorance is also there, but there is this hunger is there. What is real knowledge? Who are we? What are we? So, with these political dispensations, methodology leading us over here, and the civilizational hunger going up, I'm hoping eventually there'll be a critical wave at which point the political dispensation has to listen, to the mass, which says that this is who we are, this is what we want to see happen. When that happens, hopefully our understanding of our identity will be better. Not this identity that's been force fit on us by these five forces, but the true identity of Indians, where people can have self-esteem, strength in the civilization, knowledge of who we are, and advance these things with great strength. What we are seeing also is that from 1500s to 1900s, there has been a monopoly on science and technology by the West, thanks to colonialism. Thanks to colonialism and their ramping up of Indian knowledge. You alluded to that in the beginning, where Indian knowledge through the Arabs went into Europe via Spain, converted from Sanskrit to Arabic, Arabic to Latin. That is how Western Europe learned many of these things, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, leading to Renaissance. And then once Renaissance came about, it also came about with colonialization from Vasco da Gama, Columbus, and all these kind of people. And that led to the destruction of older civilizations' knowledge systems. All over India, you see that, Asia, you see that, and everywhere else. And the West tried to hold on to its exploitive model that God put you on earth to exploit resources of the earth. And they did not want any of these Indians to participate in the industrial revolution that was going on, because they had taken Indian knowledge systems, Indian taxes paid for the industrial revolution. For example, it was a bankroller. Indian taxes were the bankroller for the industrial revolution and such things. But they were interested in destroying, for example, the muslin, entire muslin trade in India. For example, all over India's coast, any place you go in India's ancient coastline, medieval coastline, you'll find cotton trading, cotton manufacture, cotton trading, because India was renowned for this throughout the world. They destroyed that literally overnight with textiles coming from Lancashire and places like that. They destroyed that once they had the spinning jenny and other such textiles with understanding from India. So what we're seeing is the monopoly on science and technology was done by the West by, for example, in India, by imposing ethnocide, by these five mechanisms of ethnocide, destroying Indian education system, identity, history, religion, poverty, and such things. They ensured that Indians will not participate in this growth, which is reserved for the West. So the West quickly ramped up on its GDP, if you will, because of these unfair practices and illegal unfair practices, genocidal practices. They ramped up. At the same time, Asia was stagnant. However, when the playing field was leveled, we are seeing that Indian scientists, for example, Jagdish Chandra Bose, C.V. Raman, we are seeing Ramanujan, and so many others who came and beat them at their own game and said, this is much, much better science technology than you can do. We are seeing that. We are seeing that. So my thinking is that for Indian youth today to have high self esteem and be able to reclaim the narrative calls for fixing a lot of issues in the way we are approaching this issue today. The bottom line is ignorance. We have tremendous ignorance of our past because we are deracinated. We are deracinated, mentally colonized even today. How to get rid of that, break those shackles and get out of that with knowledge. So read the works of thought leaders, read the works that others are talking, and do your own investigation. You're a seeker after all. You belong to that civilization. That's in your DNA. So become a seeker, and hopefully we will see people's self-esteem go. As the civilizational awareness is going up, hunger is going up, hopefully in the next few generations, if we are not completely killed off by this cancel culture and other such things, because they control the media today, mass media and things like that. Hopefully, we will see a reversal.
Right. So now we go to the questions, lots of them. And before that, I request everyone to please like and share the video, and also to support us and to follow us. Mahesh Madhurji, thank you so much. Thank you for your support. Mithilesh Kumar, didn't we learn a lot about our ancient heritage from the Westerners? Max Muller is said to have published the Vedas first, and a Brit archaeologist excavated Nalanda after reading a Huen Sang book in England.
So, Mithilesh ji, thank you for that question. This is the problem with many Indian thinking today. This is the kind of retort I get, for example. So, the question I have is, if the British had not destroyed Indian ecosystem in the first place, would you have the need to read it in English? You would probably be well versed in Sanskrit, be a scholar in Sanskrit, understand your knowledge system of your ancestors perfectly in your own systems. You'd be able to dictate terms from the lens of an Indic person, and not today as you're talking with the lens of a westernized person. So we would have a different outlook on life, different understanding. This is the kind of thinking that people say, for example, if the British had not rescued us with the railways and with English and other things, could we have prospered? So I'm saying they destroyed you with poverty, used your money to construct all of these things. And I'm saying, if you look at Angus Madison's curve of the GDP of the world and India's contribution, you're seeing a 10% slope. From 35%, it drops by 10% over 1,000 years. That slope continues that way till the British time and falls like this at British time till 3% or 4% in 1947. If the British were not there and I employ mathematical interpolation, then I'll erase the British period and see, put dotted lines and show you that India's GDP today should be around 15% or so. We are at 4%. If you're at
Right.
15% of the world GDP, you'd be an enormously prosperous nation today. You would
Let's go
have
to
the
more
resources
questions.
to buy technology
Rajiv,
made anywhere.
we got too
Even,
many
even if
questions.
technology was, even if technology was made in Europe or elsewhere, you could buy it with the money you had. Anyway, let's move on to the next question.
My request is, because we got too many questions, so let's be a little brief.
Short answers. I got it. I'll go short
Short
answers.
answers. Short answers, yes. Shorajit Banerjee. Boolean theory was given by Indian Rishi before George Boole. We need more information about this. There are millions Indian software engineers.
Very true, very true. Thank you for that question. So very quickly, yes, Pingala was the earliest one who talked about, for example, the expression enumeration of the binary table. You can find in Pingala's works by trying to say how many ways can you arrange a short syllable or a long syllable. For example, ga and la are two syllables. How do you arrange them? If n equal to 1, you have ga, la. If n is equal to 2, you've got ga, la, ga, la, 4. So that's a binary table. So you see binary tables are there in Pingala's work. By the time you come to Hemachandra, you're seeing combinatoric algorithms. You're seeing how many ways are there to arrange things. He's got algorithms to do that. By the time you go to Mahavira, you're seeing several other things, the Meru triangle, many things. So combinatorics was born in India. Indian logic systems were translated by Colebrook, a Britisher, and in 1800s. And George Boole, as well as De Morgan, not De Morgan, maybe I forget the name, second person's name, but they had read Colebrook's works. And that's how they got to learn about Indian knowledge systems, rather the binary systems. And this was their main inspiration to design Boolean algebra itself. What we call Boolean algebra design chips today, everything has got its fundamentals in the works of Pingala and Hemachandra. You can trace it back there.
Right.
Abhishek Lal, our first is to create a library of Niskashit shlokas and make it public. Remove all references to Niyog or those shlok that say Shudra has no right to learn. Vedas, the Islamo-Christian JC are exploiting shlokas publicly. Well, not exactly related to the topic today, so I'll give it a pass. Next. Atul Sharma, Sanjay ji, please invite Sandeep Devji. Again, not related to the topic, Atul ji, but we will do that definitely one of these days. Ashoka the Great. Slowly but surely, other countries will realize our history. Then it will become India's burden to teach others dharma. It's a comment. Thank you for that. Achintya Saxena. IKS, Indian Knowledge System in North India, moved away from Sanskrit framework, evolved into a unique form. Growth of Nath and Agor Sampradaya, Hindustani classical music, and mixing of Arab and Hindu astrology are a few examples. Uh, I think okay. Do you agree with it, or does it need a comment?
So had no problem in taking knowledge systems from anywhere because we're seekers of truth. We are not saying that India is a unique place where brains are maximum, others had no brains. We're not saying that. IQ is distributed throughout the world. So if a knowledge system arose somewhere, Indians as seekers would go evaluate that with the pramanas, and if it is in line with their learning and their advancement, they'll accept it. So yes, there has been fertilization of ideas from different places, and we've had a certain trajectory. Whether this is the best trajectory is questionable, but it is a trajectory of science and technology, and Indians can adopt it.
Suresh Kandam. Uh, Namaste. Why are Nyaya Sutra, Surya Siddhanta, etc. not given a place in Western historiography of science? Even going by translations and chronologies given by Western investigators, they had no equal until recently.
Yes. So the problem is if everything has been post dated by Max Muller to the Chandas period, Mantra period, Brahmana period, and such things, then you have a problem. Where did these things operate? So Max Muller was interested in showing Upanishads were created in India after contact with Pythagorean Greece, because that is where they wanted to show the question and answer master disciple tradition. So they tried to show that India got its question and answer Upanishad style from there. So all the corruptions you're seeing is a direct outcome of the colonial efforts to reconcile Indian chronology to biblical chronology. These are all corruptions. These had to be placed much in advance of the dates they have, but they can't do that because they're beholden to the Aryan invasion theory of 1500 BCE. That's a short answer to that.
Okay, next. Riktesh Samanta, is there any possibility our old books knowledge may exist in libraries in Indian kingdoms like Jaipur, Jodhpur, Gwalior, Mysore? There are 3 million untranslated transcripts going around, and many
My
of them are in my Rajasthan libraries, such as there is an Oriental library, and there are so many other libraries, there's Sanskrit university libraries, all lying undeciphered, untranslated, even not even archived properly.
right.
So there's a huge pool of knowledge lying to be discovered actually.
Including in universities in Europe, Oxford, Cambridge, German libraries, and universities.
Right. Achintya Saxena, according to astrology scholar Nemichan Jan in his book Bharatiya Jyotish, published by Jnanapith, Ramal and Tajik are Arabic origin techniques introduced in Hindu astrology during Islamic rule. I
So
think
the problem over here is you first remove that word astrology. It's an invention of the Europeans who digested the Siddhanta mathematical methods, took it away from the Indians, and left you with something they call astrology, which they said it's all nonsense. So today Indians go around parroting the same claim that we had astrology, but have no clue of the mathematical astronomy which your ancestors had. So first we throw away that idea. Second, the Arabs learned astronomy from Indians, from works of Brahmagupta, Aryabhatta, and others through the translations that I talked about. They learned from that. Third, even prior to that, Muhammad has talked about something called manzil, lunar manzil. Where did he get that idea from? That's nakshatra. So the nakshatras are there in the Quran. If you were to read it, you'll find it over there. You'll find it over there. So the next, once Indian mathematics was destroyed, the Muslim scientists, people like Al Ghazali, Al Fazali, Al Hayatim, many of these Islamic scientists were able to make great advances by taking Greek knowledge, Indian knowledge, and adding with their own ideas. They were able to do that in the Baghdad House of Wisdom under Caliph Harun al Rashid. They were able to do that. So they came about with something called ZIJ, astronomical tables, where they were able to get something called astrolabe. Astrolabe is an instrument. Indians had hundreds of instruments. If you read the work of Aryabhatta, if you read the works of Bhaskara, if you read the works of Lalla and many other astronomers, they're talking about instruments. Surya Siddhanta is talking about instruments. So he had many instruments. But in the Arabic world, the astrolabe was a good invention. So once they had astrolabe, they were able to make certain kind of Zij astronomical tables, which are based on Indian coordinate system, ecliptic coordinate system, and other such things. And these tables were in use for understanding some of the tables which the tradition had gone in India. During the Islamic times, my friend tells me that every so often, Vedic pundits from all over the country will meet in sammelans to compare the calendars, because the precision of equinox, calendars will go out of sync. So they were meeting from time to time to compare notes, calendars, measurements, revise them. It's a standardization in the conference, and then go back to their places. That was stopped during the Islamic times. So that whole practice was destroyed during Islamic times. So that synchronization went away. At that time, all the Islamic money was going towards Islamic astronomers. Why did they want astronomy? Ramzan moon. To find out about Ramzan moon and other such things, that was their motivation to learn astronomy. So these tables and other things were adopted from them in order to have our own accurate measurements. Not always, but in some places in Islamic world, in India, northern India, you're seeing that.
Abhishek Lal Charan, after removing the inserted shlokas by publicly stating that we must create a common knowledge repository of Indian astronomy and mathematics and linking them to our religious text. Yes, by all means, good suggestion. Thank you. Abhishek Jan, pranam all legendary personalities. I'm glad Raj's pearls of wisdom finally roped in by JD. What do you mean by finally? Mr. Raj Vedam has been at Jaipur dialogues any number of times. Which his knowledge can be used by
Not broke.
CBSE in its curriculum. He would be more than happy request JD to have more sessions. Thank you.
He's a guest. He's not roped in.
Right. Chintena Saxena. Economic history of India needs further research because even in British period, Indian elites had more private wealth than British counterparts. India was the largest market for Rolls-Royce, Cartier, etc. Yes, I guess so. You want to add anything?
No, nothing at all, because the works have already covered the wealth that Indians had in India during the Maharajas' time. You're seeing a few isolated Maharajas in a country where approximately 200 million people were there under the British times. You're seeing a few hundred, maybe maximum 1,000 Maharajas who had this excellent lifestyle. It does not mean that the artisan class in India, who were the majority in India, they were impoverished. They were impoverished by the Industrial Revolution. You're not seeing that over here. Angus Madison has accounted for that, and he has shown that India's share of the world GDP was 4% by already accommodating the Maharaja's wealth.
Right. Chilkli, Sanjay Sen, okay. Pranam Raj Vibhuti Ji and Sanjay Ji, humbled by the depth of what I learned today. Please suggest a learning path, our glorious past, Vedas, etc., for seekers who are starting out at almost a novice level.
So
Well, you're at the right place.
there are several courses. I'm offering a couple of courses in Hindu University of America. You can
Okay.
look them up. One of the courses is starting in January. I'm also offering a workshop that is going to start soon at Maharashtra Institute of Vedic Sciences. That is going to start in January 24th for about 10 days following that, where I talk about growth of knowledge systems. You're welcome to see this or other excellent works by other people also who are doing works on Indian knowledge systems.
Okay, next. Adventure time. So, did our ancestors know about Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, asteroids, etc.? Did we know stars at night and distant suns? Is Akash, Ganga, and galaxy, Brahman, and universe same or different? Where God's fits into all of that.
Good question. Good question. So, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, asteroids are not visible to the naked eye. You do require a telescope to do that. We don't know if ancient India had a telescope. There are some hints that we might have had some device that looked like a telescope, looking at Hoysaleshwara temples, epigraphy that shows something like an optical instrument being used by somebody. We're also seeing references to lenses in Adi Shankara's works, and even going to Vijayanagar kingdom, where one of the king's ministers, prime ministers, had a spectacle actually made to read some of the text. So we are seeing fascinating references to lenses in ancient Indian works, much before Europe had lenses or spectacles. We are seeing all of these things. So we don't know whether ancient Indians had these things. But what we do know is after Galileo had introduced the telescope in Western Europe, huge numbers of telescopes were created, and various people were looking at the skies, and eventually they found Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and other such things. Did Indians know Akasha Ganga? Of course they knew Akasha Ganga, because you require dark skies to see that. If you are living in a dark sky, you can see a brilliant display of the stars. If you go to Mumbai or New Delhi and try to see the sky, you'll see nothing. The light pollution will kill you. Even where I am in Houston, I can't see the night sky. The light pollution kills the sky. But if you're in a rural place or in India prior to the electric bulbs and illumination, anywhere in India for that matter, you'd see brilliant displays of the sky. I went to Hampi once in the middle of the night. I found myself on the road. My brother and family did this. And we stopped the car and looked at the sky and said, oh my God, I've never seen a sky like this. It was so amazing. So our ancient Indians on hot summer nights will have a charpoy outside. After dinner, they're not going to watch Netflix. They come out and sit in the charpoy, look at the skies, and the skies were their friends. They could see all the constellations move. That's how your ancestors became intimately familiar with the nakshatras, with the movement of heavenly bodies and everything else. So, yes, they were aware of many, many phenomena in the sky.
Okay, next. How can we, Indranil Mandal, how can we regain, recollect our libraries of lost knowledge? Well, there's plenty of knowledge still around. So first thing that we have to do is to preserve that. And once we preserve that, maybe they can lead to and give us clues to more and more knowledge.
Right.
So I think we need to preserve that, and that's requires certain amount of urgency. At least 3 million manuscripts they are
Right.
lying unattended.
So the problem of restoring Indian historiography should not fall on private citizens, people like me or people like Professor Kark or several other people. It should not be like that. The government should have a vested interest in restoring our identity and knowledge systems, and we need to see that happen. And unfortunately, that is not happening. Once they make that happen with funds, with the motive, with the statement of purpose, then we'll see brilliant thing. India has got so many brilliant people, so many Vedic pundits, so many people. If they can be used in this ecosystem to uncover our knowledge, we will be there within 2 years. We'll have a complete compendium of works and other things, and with our brilliant scientists and engineers, put it on the internet, digitize all these kind of things. It requires that political power. It requires that willpower, that determination to do it. Private citizens can't do it. We can only go and lament and rant on social media like this, but we can't do more than that. Write books, maybe, that's all.
Okay, Achintya Saxena Angus Madison was self-declared Marxist historian. So we need to be a bit careful about neutrality of his research.
Whether it's Angus Madison or Utsa Patnaik, we know they come from Marxist background. But remember, I said we as Hindus are seekers. If somebody comes with a valid piece of knowledge, which is a small progress towards the truth, why would you deny that because of his propaganda? We have no problem. We will take that because it is a stepping stone for our own greater truths. So the ideology does not matter. It is what is he bringing to the podium of truth. If he's got something over there, we'll take it.
Next. Why is Modi ji not molding young minds? After all, lost mind is a lost soul. After all, hope you succeed in your mission, Sanjay ji, to enlighten. Thank you, Santosh Kumar. Namaskaram, Sanjay ji, Raj Vedam ji, Vibhuti ji, Raj Vedam ji. Thanks for your great explanation. I bow to your knowledge and I'm a big fan of you.
Thank you.
Next. The question's over. Nathuram, the real Mahatma. Wow. Sanjay, sir, I've learned so much truth from JD in last 1 year. Thanks to the entire team, but I've observed that people aren't ready for the truth. Everyone shies away and changes topics and leaves you alone. When will we realize society based on lies is bound to collapse? I think we are getting there. We are getting there. We are
Right,
getting close to a realization. And after all, as we said, we are the seekers and we must keep seeking a
right,
change.
right.
Krishna Sundar, how powerful is the British crown right now? Well, doesn't seem to be very powerful if people can infiltrate into the Buckingham Palace to kill the Queen Elizabeth II for Jallianwala Bagh after 102 years. Well, I have serious doubts. Next. Jaya Pashupati, my question to Raj Vedam. Namaste Raji, can we see a book coming soon on today's topic?
Thank you. Yes, I am still in the process of writing, and writing a book I have discovered is not an easy joke when you have a full time job in addition to pay your bills. So, yes, I am working on it, and I have the writer's curse. When do you know it's time to start writing some of these things? Because we keep waiting for our knowledge to improve. We feel that there are holes in our understanding. We feel there's still so much more to learn, and that puts a paralysis sometimes in advancing some notions and ideas. So eventually, I hope it'll be there. So I'm writing. There's some drafts I've written, but it's an ongoing process.
Dr. Kishore Kumar, namaste to all of you. I really felt surprised and felt proud of IIT Kharagpur's step in bringing calendars on Bharatiya heritage 2021 year and new one 2022, and would like to know that what is the role of atheists in stopping us to realize our true technological heritage and potential. Well, I didn't know of that. Do you?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's important for anybody who's working in this space. It is critically important to acknowledge the efforts of other thought leaders. So only when we build our ecosystems with citation, only then we collectively improve the strength of this narrative. If we don't, then we are lone battlers over here, and we are finding that people will come and take pot shots at you, and nobody's going to come to your rescue. So it's critical that we acknowledge the works of people who came before us and the works that they did, whose ideas helped us to grow our own ideas. And this is lacking in our side, index side. We see that. So we are very, very fragmented. So I'd love to see a lot of acknowledgements coming in some of these works and showing where some of these notions came from. So if tomorrow there's an attack, I've already seen attacks on the IIT calendar, for example. Well, I'm only picking out this as an example. There are many, many other examples. You can come and say, this is a work based on this man's research. And you can go to that man's research, see his assumptions, see his models, see the validity of that. That cannot be done if we do not acknowledge some of the sources where these ideas come from. So it's critical that we acknowledge that.
Right. And as far as atheists are concerned, I don't know about atheism much because atheism basically denial. But I
The
know one
point
thing.
is if atheists come with an attack, we should be able to defend against that attack. So to make the defense happen, you must have the home team that is allied over here. You must have a home team
I
who
was
has
on a
built up
different
each
point.
other. We need to build up each other with a citation, acknowledging each other's intellectual contributions, acknowledging that we are a formidable force over here. In the absence of that, people can take anybody's work and hit them because they have not acknowledged anybody.
That's right.
That's right. What I was wanting to say was that we have a great tradition of agnosticism. And according to my impression, every great Indian rishi started out as an agnostic, as a seeker, because an agnostic is the real seeker. And unless you have that spirit of agnosticism, you cannot move much. As soon as the belief comes in, your progress is stalled. Sai B, Namaste Sanjay ji. Thank you, Sai ji. Thank you for your support. Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of today's show. Thank you so much, Raj Vedam ji and Vibhuti ji. It's a wonderful experience having you
Indeed.
here.
Yes.
And I think we may have to continue with this dialogue some other time.
Yes.
So thank you once again. Thank you all viewers. Jai Hind, Vande
Jai
Mataram.
Hind, Jai Vande Mataram. Raj Vedam in Houston.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't